According to most biblical scholars, Luke is the first author to write, presuming he and all the members of his community would die natural deaths before Jesus' return in the Perusia. What Jesus' original disciples believed would be a short interval between his death and resurrection and his second coming, now, by the mid-80s, second and third generation Christians were discovering it would comprise an entire lifetime. Though prior authors had trained their communities to be sprinters, Luke was in the business of training the members of his church to be long-distance runners. There was now an unforeseen element of time present in carrying on the ministry of Jesus. People now were being asked to be other Christs for much longer than the historical Jesus had originally carried on his ministry. More than 6 centuries before this particular Capernaum carpenter shuttered his shop and began his itinerant preaching ministry, the prophet Habakkuk also must deal with divine delay, Yahweh's rewards and punishment. Habakkuk wanted to make certain God knows what's happening. He wrote, "How long, O Yahweh? I cry for help, but you do not listen. I cry out to you violence, but you do not intervene. Why do you let me see ruin? Why must I look at misery?" God simply not doing what the prophet presumed God would immediately do. Though Yahweh assures him he will not disappoint, that's not very helpful to Habakkuk in the here and now. Perhaps we have an advantage over Habakkuk in Luke's community: our belief in evolution. When people of faith thought the world as they knew it came to existence just as they knew it, it must have been much more difficult to tolerate the time it took for God to carry out God's promises. But since the days of Darwin, and especially since the theology of Teilhard de Chardin, we're more accustomed than our ancestors to things happening over a long period of time. This world and we humans didn't pop up in a blink of an eye. Desjardins was convinced it was the weakest, not the strongest link in the evolutionary chain that eventually evolved. When push comes to shove, the strongest doesn't have the ability to adapt. Like the ultra-strong dinosaurs, they couldn't adapt to the post-meteorite world. It simply ceased to exist. According to Desjardins, what makes us Christians the weakest link in the evolutionary chain is our determination to love those around us. Excuse me. Nothing weakens us more than to love another person. To survive, we must adapt and change. In our case, the change and adaptation only happens by loving. Centuries of loving has eventually helped us eliminate slavery, give women the right to vote, and regard all people as our sisters and brothers, no matter their race. The only problem is it took centuries to pull this off, to evolve to this point. It certainly didn't happen on Easter Sunday night. The unknown author of 2 Timothy would no doubt agree that enduring such a long period of time before change happens is one of the hardships we bear for the sake of the gospel. Likewise, when Luke's Jesus assures us we only need faith the size of a mustard seed to uproot and replant, he mercifully doesn't tell us how long that process will take. We're simply his servants, people who are trying to implement his 2,000-year-old vision for this world, people constantly amazed at the evolving world we're creating, the unprofitable servants who are simply doing what we're obliged to do. It's just taking a little bit longer to experience the results of our loving than many of us had originally planned.